Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Orchestrator Weekly. We don't have too many topics to discuss, but we can talk about a missing NFS feature. NFS LGW exports in Ceph Ansible supported the ability to not just only export a single bucket, but also to export a group of buckets associated to a single user, and it's missing. At least that's what I understand. Reading Casey's mail.
Yeah. Okay. So the behavior of Ganesha is that if you specify the user for the export, and then you can either export bucket or you can export top level, and then you have a top level directory that lists all the buckets that are owned by that user. So he said, is it owned by or has access to? Owned by, I believe. And Maker creates a bucket. But the way the manager NFS module works, it only currently supports exporting at the bucket level, and the user is always the owner of that bucket. I think that behavior is fine. The question is, if we want to add behavior so that you can create an export that's RGW user, basically, that's one level up, then we need a way to, then I think the way to do that is to basically make the command, the export create command, instead of passing a bucket name, you give it a username, an RGW user, and then it'll create an export for that user. That seems like the reasonable thing, right? Yeah.
And it seems to be actually used by people to not only have the ability to export buckets, but also by user.
Yeah.
What would we need to do in order to make it happen?
These are the current commands. Like, I almost wonder if instead of create RGW, it should be NFS export create bucket, RGW bucket, that all the other stuff, and NFS export create. I mean,
that works because we are pulling out the user based on the bucket owner, right? So we don't need to specify the user when
right.
exporting a bucket.
Yeah. Or it could be NFS export create RGW bucket. Or it's like maybe I don't know, but SF.
The pseudo path doesn't make any sense when exporting for a user.
Yeah, it does. Pseudopath is that's the location on the NFS server. That always has to be present.
Ah, okay.
Like, I almost wish we had arranged these a little bit differently, the argument, so that pseudopath is first. So it's like cluster ID pseudopath and then FS name, or cluster ID pseudopath and then, like, it could be cluster ID pseudo bucket or user. I can't remember how new these commands are. Are they brand new? And have they been backported yet?
They have been backported, and they were already existing. I think they are already in, to some degree, they are already in.
I think the RGW one is new though. It wasn't implemented when I started.
Yes, RGW is new. The NFS part is already in Octopus. But
So we could change the
the
RGW one, but it'd be
we,
weird
we
if it would be weird
if
to have,
yeah, yep. Sorry, go on, please.
or the order is different. Not so sure about that.
I think we could align the order with how it is right now. I think the order is not 100% important or super important.
But well, the second suggestion basically makes the bucket name no longer positional because you either specify a bucket or a user, but not both. And so that would be different, right? Like there's nothing right here.
We've changed the CLI anyway. We introduced the keyword NFS export create NFS. Cephfs, which
That's
means
one.
we broke the CLI anyway. So why not
We
breaking it
break
again?
it again. The saga continues. So if we did that, then it would be, we could do this. Like that.
One problem is that this NFX export create LCW only works if you have mandatory keyword arguments. That doesn't work with positional arguments, because if you're doing def export create LCW cluster ID pseudo path and then something, can either be a bucket or a user.
Yeah. So it would require a keyword argument of either bucket or user. The other. Yep.
And mandatory keyword arguments were never backported to Pacific.
I'm not sure that matters. You can just, they don't have, what does that even mean? Because the module can just say if neither of them is specified, then it returns an error, right? Inval.
Yep.
I don't remember what you mean by mandatory keyword.
That was the part I skipped when backporting the NFS pull requests to Pacific. We made some changes to the argument parsing.
Oh, right. Hmm. I mean, what that basically means is that if you're running Pacific and you do NFS export, I don't know my keyword. My cluster. If you do that, interpret ABC as either a bucket or a user, depending on how the order that we define them.
Yep.
And it'll be kind of ambiguous. Whereas if you run that same command on Quincy, it will be an error.
I mean, we could.
I think that's okay. That's like a corner case. We can document always doing this.
We could default to bucket.
Yeah, which I think Yeah, it would basically be like this.
At least for Pacific. Okay,
User,
that sounds like a plan.
like that, basically. And we'll return an error if both or neither of those are specified.
Yep.
Okay.
And it looks like we have to implement it. Travis, do you know if Rook or Omega, do you know if Rook supports this kind of exporting NFS LGW users?
I'm trying to remember it. I mean, we haven't really done much with NFS, honestly. We need to iron that out.
Can I add it?
I mean,
Well,
there's some exports in that can be defined. I guess I don't recall the details of how that fits together.
I think it also doesn't matter if Rook supports it. Like Rook will support defining the NFS server, I believe. So if you do
Right.
NFS cluster create blah blah blah, it'll go tell Rook to create it. But everything else, the managing the exports, doesn't involve Rook at all, right?
Right. Because it's all just in a Rados object, right?
Yeah, right.
Yep.
I think it's okay.
That's what it is. Okay.
Great. Is there anything else we can discuss today?
Can I ask about the status of the LSO OpenLVM project? Like
Yeah.
what's
The
where
latest.
are things
Agreed.
stand there?
So we're still, basically working on integrating TopLVM and TopLVM operator with OCS product. TopLVM isn't planning on like moving over to Rook or anything. They'd like to keep their own independent project, which is fine. They have good open, I feel like a good open community for the TopLVM project.
Yeah. But they are open to, they're going to add the like raw device support, the other things we need, add all those things to it. Inventory.
So I guess where we're starting is for raw device support. I mean, we've got the TopLVM operator that's going to create the VGs based on the devices you want. So that's still separate. But so I think the first step is let's see how we can use it, how it is before we try and go integrate raw devices into the core TopLVM driver. So I think we haven't really gone there yet, I guess is what I'm trying to say for raw devices. But yeah, that would really just make everything work well and end getting there. But I think we just let's start somewhere and start with what we have. So
I mean, do we need to make sure that they're like generally on board with the longer term plan? Because I'm just worried that if they're not, then we're gonna like have to switch gears again later.
Right. So yeah, I just don't think we've had that discussion yet. Juan Miguel, what's that?
Yeah, I think that I can update about that. Okay, we have tried to contact with the TopLVM operator team that basically are two persons. Okay, and one is only one active. Okay, it's a very recent project. Okay, and the 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 results are not very good, okay, because the way to communicate with them is just using an email, okay. We are going to propose to have a meeting. I don't know if this week, next week, okay, in order to comment about what are the possibilities to contribute to the project and what are the possibilities to do the changes that we need, okay? Because the current TopLVM project, it uses, for example, a fork of TopLVM, okay? That is not the right thing to do. It uses as base image Ubuntu image. So we will need to change that. We need to provide discovery, automatic discovery without without the need of creating a Topol VM cluster CRD. That is the way that in this moment is working. So basically, summarizing, we need to do several changes that are going to affect heavily the design and are going to affect well, the current status of the project. I thought they have started almost 3 months ago. And well, we need to be sure that this is going to be possible, and if the contribution in the Topol VM operator are going to be something factible for us to do in the next months. Okay, this is the situation in this moment. Okay, so the plan B is to create a completely new operator to use Topol VM and to fulfill our features.
Right, and I think, I mean, since just to be clear, there are the two separate projects. So Top LVM itself, I feel like it's in a better place. Top LVM operator, it's not looking so good as a community project. I just and I think the question Sage was asking about was more about Top LVM itself and having it support raw devices, and so then we may not even need the Top LVM operator as well if it just handles raw devices. Well, it might need to set up the VGs for those we want anyway. But anyway, we made. Where at my head is we probably need to go create our own operator for working with Top LVM. Maybe fork the Top LVM operator if they're just not seeing the vision with community.
Okay.
But,
Would if the operator is separate from Topol VM itself, would it make sense to make like part of Rook be the operator, like to have Rook operate Top LVM?
Yeah, the Rook operator for
like Rook local
for Top LVM, really.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm a little bit fuzzy on what's the difference between the Topol VM operator and Topol LVM itself. The operator just deploys Topol LVM, which is its CSI driver, basically.
Yeah, Top LVM is just the CSI driver, and then the operator would basically allows you to manage creating the VGs that will feed the CSI driver.
Okay. Because if we
assumes you set up all the VGs before it gets it.
Because in one version of this, if Topol LVM supports both raw devices and VGs, then and LVs, then the VGs would be managed dynamically based on demand, right? And so you wouldn't necessarily want to have that be a separate part. Went all the way down that road.
Right. I'm trying to think through that. I mean, if the driver is aware of all of them and could just create the VGs dynamically, why would you need a separate?
Right. Like it has its inventory. It has some mask of like which devices it's allowed to manage. Which is instead of pre-creating the VGs, you would just wait for a request to come along. You're like, oh, I need more logical volume space. Add another raw device to the VG.
Mm-hmm.
Or if a request comes in for a raw device, before that happens, then you just give them the raw device.
This is one of the things that the Topol VM operator is doing, if I'm not too wrong, okay? Is checking what are the available devices that we have in the different nodes, okay? And if these nodes, these devices are going to be used, the Topol VM operator is creating VGs in these raw devices.
But if it's a separate operator, then it has to do that ahead of time so that Topol VM has something to manage.
No, the
Whereas
Topo LVM, no, it's in the Topo LVM operator, this kind of feature.
right. So if it's in the operator though, instead of Topo LVM itself,
Yeah,
and the requests are coming to Topo LVM, then that means that the operator has to pre-create the VGs for
yes,
Topo LVM to consume, which means that you
yes.
can't. I mean, I don't know exactly how important the scenario is, but you can imagine a box that has 4 raw devices, and it has a storage class for LVs and a storage class for raw devices. And if you just set it up, you don't know whether somebody's gonna want raw devices or LVs yet. And so you don't necessarily want to recreate a bunch of VGs across those raw devices, because then you might get a request for raw devices and they're all used up, right? And so you need to just leave them blank until you get a request, either a raw device or an LV request through one of those storage classes. And only then do you know whether there's
Yes, but the VG is going to be created in the raw device in order to be used for.
only if you get a request for an LV. If you get a request through the storage class that provisions raw devices, then you don't create a VG. You wanted to give them the raw device.
I think that the VGs are created, okay, by default, because
Yes, that's how it works right now, right? But I'm saying that if we want to be able to have a separate storage class that gives you raw devices without LVM, then we can't prime all the devices with LVM for us.
Okay, I understand.
There aren't any raw devices. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it's much better if you don't have to decide in advance which devices are raw, which devices are for LVs. If it's just dynamic and whichever request comes first gets fulfilled.
Yeah,
that's the ideal.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of devices coming that for that which that's like if it's a ZNS device, like you can't put ZNS. I mean that makes the decision easy, I guess, because you literally can't put LVM on top of it. So you won't, and so it will always be available via the other storage class. But I think they're going to
put it on which device? I didn't hear that.
A ZNS device, just like
ZNS, yeah.
ZNS, right? Then LVM won't work on the ZNS, so it won't. But that one you don't really have that ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that if the Topo LVM maintainers are on board with having dynamic provisioning for RAW and LVM inside the same operator, then we should jump straight to that solution. Otherwise, we're going to end up writing all this stuff. We're going to write an operator that sets up all the VGs, and then we're going to throw it away later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we're going to have to re-architect again. Like if we can just jump straight to the end goal, that would be.
Right. So we need to have that discussion with top LVM folks, not top LVM operator.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, if when that meeting gets set up, we copy me, and then.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, and Sebastian, just to make sure I understand, the plan is to change the CLI for the NFS export create CephFS also, right? Just so that the argument order matches.
Maybe.
I have to say that the argument order always hurt my brain, the current argument order. I think this changing the argument order is intuitive for me at least, because it's cluster and pseudopath, which is like server :/path or whatever, and then what's there. I think in that sense it's a little bit more intuitive, but yeah, it is changing it. So did this get backported into the latest point release? I can't remember because I guess it's
so it's already out. It's already out. we have to make sure is that anyone using the CLI programmatically is using named arguments instead of relying on the order. That includes definitely Ceph Ansible, which will probably need to call Ceph NFS export create when migrating.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, as long as we make sure that everyone makes use of named arguments, we should be fine.
Yeah.
And maybe we should have a look at who's actually using that CLI already. Shouldn't be that many. I mean, you should be able to count them on one hand.
Yeah. I mean, it should
Users
be
actually
pretty
use.
simple.
Yeah. Because it's just brand new, especially the NGW part. So.
Yep.
I would be okay with arguing for changing it, even though it means breaking the CLI.
Okay. Yeah, me too. And we might flag that we don't necessarily promise that there won't be further changes within the specific cycle, since we've already done it twice.
We have to treat the CLI as a user interface.
Yeah.
And we can't just keep the user interface backward compatible all the time because it's just not going to work.
Right.
APIs need to be stable, but CLIs don't. And
Yeah, well,
the bad thing about our CLI is that it's both a user interface and an API.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Okay. Well, I'll reply to Casey's email and then I'll start making these changes, I guess.
That would be great.
Cool.
Cool. Anything else for today?
Nope.
No? Perfect. The next week.
Great. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.